began her research studying invasive species, specifically parasites and invasive species, bringing parasites into an area and then native species transferring parasites into incoming invasive species, both increasing the population of parasites in the area. From there, her research interest grew to the integrity of ecology, which includes parasites, animal behavior, and human behavior that influences the whole system. And Mari is currently a research scientist in the Kaprowski Conservation Research Lab, where her research is focused on the animal behavior component of ecology. And today she will be talking to us about animal personality and its role in wildlife conservation.
Yeah, okay, hello everyone. So let's see if this works. Animal personality. I'm pretty sure that any of us who has a pet has thought about animal personality before. So maybe the connection between animal personality and wildlife is not like that straightforward. And so today what I'm gonna do is I will first describe what animal personality is, and then I will show you what is its connection to wildlife conservation and management. And then I will introduce like some of my studies that I conducted over the last years. So let's start from the definition of animal personality. It's different from behavior, because if we think of a behavior, then we can think of an animal jumping, running, hiding. Those are single behaviors. But when it comes to animal personality, here we're talking about a behavioral repertoire. So it's some individual differences in behavior that have to be consistent over time and over different contexts to be considered a personality. And so these traits, and I will soon introduce what these personality traits are, they have between individuals differences, but they have within individual consistency. And so what are these personality traits? Here are the 5 main personality traits that generally we examine in research. And there's going to be a shy, bold continuum. And so you can think of even like a person, like you can be more or less shy, but it's really just a continuum. There is not just a person that can be totally considered shy or totally considered bold. And shy, bold is the response of those individuals to risky situations. Then if we expose an individual to a new situation, in that case, we can see what is the exploration or avoidance level that that individual has. Then there is activity, there is like the general moving activity of an animal, and then how an animal responds to conspecifics. So we can either have agonistic behaviors toward conspecifics, and that will be, of course, aggression. And any type of non-agonistic behavior will be considered a social trait for that animal. Yeah. But there is more, because animal personality is not just like a world per se. Like it is connected to other things related to the life of an animal. And so here there is this study from 2010, where for the first time, one of the researchers that has the most work on animal personality presented this new concept of pace of life syndrome, where it connects behavior with the physiology of an animal and also with life history traits. And so the pace of life, it's considered like, again, a continuum between a slow to a fast pace of life. And let's focus for now on fast pace of life. In terms of behavior, then we expect that an individual that has a fast pace of life will have a high dispersal, will be more aggressive and less social, like to conspecifics, will be very active, will be an explorer, will be a fast and superficial explorer, and will be in general like a bold animal. But these individuals, they also have some physiological characteristics that are interconnected to this way of behaving. There is a different type of reactivity in their nervous system. It is how fast their metabolism is. So an individual on a fast pace of life will have a fast metabolism. They will be more sensitive to oxidative stress and have a low immune response. And then in terms of life history traits, this individual, now it's pretty intuitive that they will grow fast, they will reproduce early in age, and they will probably have a shorter life. And personality is something that is measurable. And so how do we measure personality in animals, especially in wild animals? There are mostly like two ways of measuring it, and it's like either using a direct measurement, so exposing the animal to an experiment, and then there are indirect measurements. Some examples could be trackability or track diversity, where we have trackability means like how many times the same individuals gets captured in your traps. That is a proxy for boldness, because it means that that individual is prone to risky situations. And then track diversity is like how many different traps have captured this individual, and that is a proxy for the exploration level of an individual. And but that we have to keep in mind that when we use indirect measurements that basically are connected to what I just presented you before, so like that behavior is also connected to life traits, to physiology, then there's going to be some noise in the measurement that we take, because of course, in this case, trackability or diversity is connected to how an individual also moves in the space, but we all know that the movement ecology of an individual is also affected by different other factors. And another example of indirect measurement could be while you are handling an animal, the breath rate. How fast is that animal gonna breathe? That could be another factor that could give us an indication of the type of personality for that animal. And of course, these are types of measurements that are much likely to be used with smaller animal, because it's gonna be difficult to fit, for example, a bear into an arena test to perform our experiment, our test, and measure personality. And so I study animal personality because I think it's like super fascinating, but there is something more other than also the pleasure of discovery or interest. Animal personality is actually connected to can also be connected to the success of our conservation of management actions. And now that you know what animal personality is, I would like to hear from you what you think it could be in applied wildlife conservation and management research, the domains that might be affected by personality. And so like if you scan this QR code with your phone, or you just type the address below, it will take you to a page, and you can submit anything that crosses your mind to this page, just because I'd like to hear from all of you online and also here in presence, like what you think, what you think could be. I started with space use. We just mentioned trackability, diversity is connected to space use. What else do you think personality could be connected to if you think of like the ecology of an animal? And you can submit as many answers as you want in the next minute. Human-wildlife conflict, yes. For example, like individuals that are bolder, they might be also more habituated to people, and they could create more human-wildlife conflicts. This livestock conflicts, of course, like individuals that are more explorative, they are more likely to encounter livestock in the landscape, and also even if livestock often can mean also human presence, they might also be bold enough not to care about it. Mating behavior, because we can see that based on the personality, they might have a higher or a lower reproductive success, and they could be better, like with the exploration, they could also come in contact with more receptive females. Migration, yes, it's movement. So movement means also level of exploration. Migration also means like you could be bold, and so be more prone to risk, and so also to not to survive the migration if you're bold, and so you're exposed to yourself to risky situations. Human avoidance, trapping methods. Like we just said, of course, like shy individuals, they are the ones that are more difficult to detect and to capture because they do not want to get into your trap, even if you reward that. So here are just like some samples, and like thank you so much for doing this. And here is mostly just like grouping all of those ideas together. These are all the factors, all the domains that can be expected by animal personality. They have then a strict relation to wildlife conservation actions or wildlife management. And there is like, as we said, detection captures, stress response, the movement, how they select the habitat, reproductive success, also parasite infection, the harvest success, like human-wildlife conflicts, the control of invasive species, or management actions or conservation actions like translocation or reintroduction and ecosystem services. And so I could spend probably like the next hour and a half just on this slide, but I would like some of them are more intuitive, how a personality could be related to those factors, but I would like to hear from you if there is one that you're like, I don't really know how personality is really connected to this, and I'll be happy to give you some examples. Yes. Yeah. So if you are an explorer, you are going to move more in your landscape. And so if you move more and around, you are more likely to get to encounter an infected stage of the parasite, being infected. But it's not just you getting infected, it's that if you are explorative, then probably you're also going to be social because there is what is called a behavioral syndrome. So traits that are connected. If you're social, you're probably going to spread the parasite into also other individuals in the population. And so that is also something that when we do studies, especially on zoonosis, personally, it's something that should be considered in our models and our assessment, because not all individuals can, not all individuals help the spread of the disease in the same way. Yes.
Ecosystem services.
Ecosystem services. Ecotourism, for example. When we go do whale watching, we like to see a whale, but yeah, cool if you see it that it's like, I don't know, like 2 kilometers away. But if it's next to your boat, it's like so much more exciting. And so they provide, for example, whales that are more explorative, that are bold, that are social. They are the ones that provide people with a good cultural experience. But they are also like, let's think of ecotourism, even just for the state of Wyoming, like how much also those individuals help us with the economic impact that ecotourism has. And so like there is this double service, but let's also remember that those individuals that are also not scared of people, that are bolder, they are also the ones that probably will get somehow involved in human-wildlife conflict at some point. So there's like this trade-off. Or another example could be soil. Now you're gonna think that I'm going like a little extreme telling you this, but earthworms, they do have personality. And actually that is something that already Darwin was studying like for 30 years. And he was already describing worms as brave or timid, as tidy or slovenly in the way they were doing their job in the soil. And so you can see how like then different individuals of earthworms can like work with the soil, with our soil differently. And the same could be for arthropods that break down material. So they are providing an ecosystem service. Or if we go to vertebrate, we can think of the burrowing animals, like marmots, prairie dogs. We always identify them as ecosystem engineers because of like the disproportionate effect that they have on the landscape that they inhabit. And especially for those that live in a social system like colonies, then there is going to be probably the individual who is bold and explorer, and they will go further from the burrow for eating, for exploration, or mating. And then there will be the shy individual that will probably be the one that says, you know what, I'll just be here and I will look for enemies and I will look for predators and I will give you the alarm if you need. to just get back into your burrow. So different personality can provide different ecosystem services on our landscapes. Okay, let's keep going. But if you have any others, just please take a note and I'll be happy to answer during the questions. And so before I keep going, is there something that it's not clear that you would like to a better explanation about what is animal personality? Okay. So 3 studies I will introduce to you today. One will be the relationship between personality and habitat selection. Another, how the space use and fluctuating resources are affected by personality. And another one regarding interspecific competition and personality. Let's start with habitat selection. In my study, I selected a very particular type of habitat, that is the forest edge. The forest edge is also called a transition zone or an ecotone because it has properties that are probably like a mix between, for example, the meadow in this picture you'll see and the forest. But sometimes what's special about ecotones is that they have properties that do not belong to any of those 2 habitats, but they are new properties that are developed because of them laying on an edge between 2 different habitats. And for example, the edge, it can be for an animal. It can expose you more to predation because you are more visible from aerial predators, because terrestrial predators, they use the edge as a trail. But there are also some benefits in being in the edge. You can use both habitats, like what the meadow provides you, what the forest provides you in terms of resources. And then the edge, because it gets more light compared to the middle of the forest, there will be a different productivity. So maybe more food resources, more shrubs and grasses that will give you cover, especially if you are a small mammal. And so this is also why I selected small mammals, because they have a very important role in our ecosystems. They are secondary seed dispersers, so they do actually provide a service for us. They help in the regeneration of the forest, and they are also a super important food resource for many predators, from mesocarnivores to top predators as well. So I selected 2 study areas, both with a meadow and then a very sharp edge with this mixed forest starting. And this study was conducted in northern Italy. And then I created 3 transects where I would trap my small mammals, one at the edge and then one 50 meters inside the forest and one 100 meters, so that this 3 transect will be independent from each other because they are small mammals, so they cannot move too far generally. I track my individuals, and in terms of a personality, how I measured this in this case was using an indirect measurement. So I use trappability as a proxy for boldness, and the trap diversity as a proxy for exploration. I have my 2 areas. I trapped more than 150 bank voles with almost 500 capture events during 1 year in free trapping, in free seasons with different trapping sessions. And what I expected in my research hypothesis was that because of what I just mentioned about small mammals and living on the edge, I would have expected that bank voles would be bolder on the edge, and they would probably be even more explorative because they need to use 2 different habitats. But that's not what I found. I actually did not find any difference in the level of explorational boldness of individuals between the 3 transects. And so bold voles or voles that have a stronger tendency to explore were homogeneously distributed. That means that there was not some type of pressure in selection for specific personality traits, because probably they were not of advantage for these individuals. And when I talk about advantages, I'm talking about fitness. So if a trait is selected, is because the fitness of those individuals is improved. And so I would expect a higher survival, higher reproductive success. And I tested those 2 components, and also they did not differ between the 3 transects. So in this case, my hypothesis was not confirmed. And next one, we will look about how the space use is related to personality. And my idea was that since the personality traits affect how individuals perceive and interact with their environment, do they also influence the way individuals adapt their space use when the resources in their environment fluctuate? And so space, we know that movement ecology is very important when we study wildlife because it has like different effects. It has at individual level, the way an individual moves is affected by the behavior, it affects the survival of an individual, it affects their reproductive success. But it also has an effect at higher levels, population and community level, because the way an individual moves is gonna affect also the way that individual will or will not interact with conspecifics or other species, or the way it will interact and affect the environment. And we are familiar with the idea that there are several intrinsic factors other than extrinsic factors that affect how an animal moves. And different species move differently. The age, the sex, and also the body size of an animal will affect their movement ecology. And so how personality does fit in all this? To answer this question, my study system was in the Italian Alps, and the target species was the Eurasian red squirrel, Sciurus vulgaris. And I'm going to give you just a little bit of background on their movement ecology because it's going to be functional to the rest of the presentation. So males generally have bigger arm ranges than females, and the home range males also overlap with several females because of their reproductive strategy. Females, they have smaller core areas than males, and also they have intra-sex exclusive core areas because they want to protect their resources. So what we did is that we used our data from 2000 to 2009 on capture, macro capture in 3 different populations. And we also used telemetry data from these individuals. And so the main characters of this presentation, of this research were 64 squirrels, males and females. And again, in this case, we used indirect measurements of personality. And so we had trapability and trap diversity that we thought could influence the home range and how the core area of squirrels. But also there were other factors in our analysis that were, of course, like the body mass, which season we were tracking squirrels, at the food level, was low food level or high food level, and the density of the population of squirrels itself. And then we did our analysis separate by sex because, as I just said, they move differently. And so here are the results just for males. What we found was that both males, they have bigger core areas. And this is because this way they can increase their access to food and to females. And so this behavior, like both individuals, are favored when there is a low food availability and they need to look for more resources in their space, and also when the density of the receptive females is low. The number of the receptive females is low. And then explorative males, so they had smaller core areas. If you are all around the forest, like you can't be very territorial and defend a big space. So smaller core areas and big home ranges, specifically though, when the female density was low. And so that means that the explorative individuals are actually favored when they are looking for receptive females that are few in numbers. And now females. Both females, they had smaller core area overlaps with males because this way they increase their access to the food available in that space. And the core area overlap was bigger when the food availability was low. And that is because this way they cope with the increased intrasexual competition under food limited conditions. And explorative females, they had smaller home ranges and core areas when the food was scarce. This was like a result that we were we asked ourselves, why is that? And we believe that the reason it is that if you're an explorative individual, then you know your territory very well. And so when the food becomes low, then you shift your home range to those that you know are few high quality habitat patches that produce more food for you. And then we also found that explorative females had bigger home ranges, so if the female density was low. And so the conclusion from this study was that the relationship between individual personality and space use becomes relevant just as specific extrinsic conditions. That is, when female density is low, and that is the influential factor for males, and the food availability is the influential factor for females. And then last one, how personality affects interspecific competition. In this case, the study system was the pretty popular in invasive biology, like system of native Eurasian red squirrel and invasive eastern gray squirrel. In Italy, specifically, eastern gray squirrels that are native to North America, they were introduced in the late 70s, and they do outcompete Eurasian red squirrels. And our questions was that when there is the occurrence of a competitor that belongs to another species that is similarly ecologically speaking, we were wondering if this might induce a change in the selection of the personality trait because of the interspecific competition, because maybe some traits that are less adapted in a single species situations then become actually winners in the co-occurrence. And so the idea was like interspecific competition influences the adaptiveness and so the relative occurrence of these different personality traits. And as a result, then our hypothesis was that when the native squirrel was in co-occurrence with the invasive squirrels, we would expect the red squirrels to be bolder, to be more active, and also to be more social. And so what we did in this case, we did a direct measurement of personality. And so in this case, this video is not an Eurasian red squirrel, it's actually a Fremont squirrel from Arizona from another study that we carried out. But I just wanted to show how the arena test works. You go to the field, you trap your individual, you mark it, you just collect all the measurements you need, and then you put this squirrel into this white box that we built. That is an arena test, and we performed the arena test that is composed of two tests. The first test is 4 minutes and it's called open field test. So you basically expose your individual to a new environment that it has never seen before, and you record with the camera how this squirrel behaves for 4 minutes. And so you record single behaviors in terms of also of how many times that behavior occurs, and also for how long in those 4 minutes that behavior occurs. And then after 4 minutes, and in this way you measure the level of shyness or boldness of your individual, if it's more or less explorative, and also the level of movement or level of activity. And then after 4 minutes, you remove the panel that here is in the back, and it shows a mirror. And so the squirrel will see like itself reflected, but it is a way for us to understand how that individual would react with a conspecific. And so with the mirror image stimulation test, we would see if a squirrel avoids the mirror, if it's more social, or if it just stays in alert. But what do you think is this individual? Is it more explorative, or is it more or less active?
Active.
Yeah, to me, it was like, this was a pretty good example of a very active squirrel. So we selected different study sites, one where there was just a native squirrel, and others where there were like both native and invasive squirrel. And we trapped our squirrels, we exposed them to the arena tests. And so we had a total of about 1 individual for 100 individuals of red squirrels per area type, red only versus red gray, and several arena tests with also some repetition for the same individual, because remember, we need to be sure that those measurements are consistent within the individual. So we will, there's like a lot of like modeling included, but there is like a way to see if what you're measuring is actually repeatable over time, and that is indication that you are actually measuring personality traits. And what we found is that the activity level of red squirrels was the same between the red only areas and the red gray areas. But we did find that red squirrels that lived with gray squirrels, they were more social and less and would avoid less conspecifics. But then, like, our question was, is this just phenotypic plasticity, or is there like in action like a selection process where this being like more social and less avoidant is actually good for the fitness of the individual? And so we measured the probability of survival and the probability of reproduction in these two populations. We actually did not find a relationship between personality traits and the probability of either surviving or reproducing. And so what does that mean? That red squirrels that compete with invasive gray squirrels, that they had a higher sociability scores and also higher between individual variance in sociability. And so they did change their personality traits, but there was no sign that these observed differences were actually a consequence of some character displacement that was driven by interspecific competition. And so interspecific competition did cause changes in the red squirrel personality, but it was more a context-related advantage of sociability or avoidance rather than some process of microevolution. And so I know this slide is awful graphically, but I really wanted to conclude this presentation like reading this passage from this paper by Merrick and Kroski 2017, because I really think that it catches the whole point of this presentation. And so here it goes. Rather than just noise around the population mean, individually distinct behavioral traits have observable ecological and evolutionary consequences. That personalities are maintained within populations is testament to their importance as the products of natural selection. Observe the rapid changes to the frequency of individually distinct behavioral traits within populations facing strong selections like harvesting, urbanization, captivity, invasive species are examples of contemporary evolution and serve as reminders that management actions can have evolutionary consequences. Therefore, the ecological and evolutionary consequences of anthropogenic disturbance and management actions on personality should be considered along with other ecologically important traits to ensure evolutionary enlightened management. And so thanks to John, who is here as an author of this. And so now I would like to say that whoever is still with me, despite this being the perfect time of the day to nap, and who in the shy bold continuum feels like closer to the bold side, then I'll be happy to answer your questions.
I would like to hear more about, from one of your first slides, how the personalities help control invasive species.
Yeah, so it's mostly, okay, so there are two aspects. One is that, especially like when it comes to invasive species, there is a lot of like management in terms of either control or eradication. And if you work at the front range of like the expansion of this invasive species, we need to keep in mind that probably those are the individuals that are bold and that are explorative. And so that also means that will be like easier for us to capture them, because individuals that are bold and explorative, bold, they will more likely like get into your trap, and explorative, they are more likely to encounter the trap on the landscape. And then like there is the other aspect. If you go into like the eradication program, those are the individuals that would take away, that you will take away first. And then you will keep individuals that are shy. And so that means that are less detectable and they are less likely to be trapped. And so there are two things. One, your estimates of the remaining population could be biased because you don't see as many, you're not capturing as many, but they are actually there. And then another thing is that generally in eradication programs, when the density of the population to eradicate becomes like lower, then you have to increase your effort to capture the remaining individuals. But instead of just thinking of density, we should also think of how much those individuals are prone to be captured, that we know is like much less. So we don't need to increase our effort in terms of like different methods of trapping animals, or different types of traps, or how many traps you use. But we should also increase those in terms of like, okay, these individuals, even if they're there, they're probably just gonna give us a hard time to get captured.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you're making the case that personality matters for conservation and management. And I think you had some, the framing of these different examples of where it matters. And that definitely resonates. Then on the other hand, sort of the case studies that you present, you sort of have a lot of, you don't support a lot of your hypotheses. And it sort of shows that there wasn't like a fitness performance for some of these animals. There wasn't, differences in how different personality traits were distributed across the landscape and different habitat use. I guess, how do you reconcile that sort of these like null results with sort of trying to justify why personality matters for conservation and management? Because in some ways, at least in the squirrel examples, it seems like almost like it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Or am I misinterpreting that? And some of it might just be the
well,
species are
I
choosing
think
to.
there is a difference between the presence of personality traits that affect your actions in terms of data management to conservation, and the fact that the presence of those personality traits are actually the result of selection, of evolution.
Yeah.
As I was reading in the very last slide, there is a reason why within a population we have like this spectrum of different personalities, and they are because if just the selection was the force that was driving, then we would have like this type of personality. This is the one that is most effective and most successful in this type of environment, in this place, in this moment.
Yeah.
And so that's what we will all have. But we know that in nature things change. Sometimes, like when there is our footprint in it, they change very fast, or if it's natural, they might or might not change fast. And so the thing that we have different types of personalities, they are actually like a strategy so that animals don't get extinct, like altogether in a population. They actually some that will perform better. And so, for example, it means that that I did find personalities, for example, in Bengals. We had like explorative individuals, we had bold individuals, and others that were shy or less explorative. But just the type of habitat they were living in was not the selection force. And so I think there is this different thing. But for example, the fact that the personality do exist, as I was mentioning, for example, it can affect how you trap, and how you, when we do population dynamic studies, our results could be biased because we're not considering that we are capturing those animals that are more prone to be captured, and we are not seeing all the others. And so maybe we have a sex ratio that might not be necessarily it, or we could see like a young individuals more than adults, but that's because maybe like they're in the phase, they are more explorative, so they are more like likely to encounter traps. So I think there is this big difference between personality traits existing and how that actually, either if it's or it's not a result of evolution, they do affect our actions, compared to like, yes, this is selection that is working to select those type of personality traits.
Thanks.
And also, for example, for the red-gray squealer, our study was over 2 years. And so it would be interesting to see if those results are confirmed if we look at the populations when the great squirrels were introduced in different times, like young, like when it was just introduced compared to 20 years after it was introduced. Mm-hmm. At that point, would we see this effect of selection for those individuals? And then there was, I think, another question.
Yeah, it's kind of a complicated question. I'm trying to think about how to phrase it. So I was wondering how you decided on like the behavior continuums, like shy, bold, explorative avoidance, aggression, etc. And if you took into account like thinking about how those terms might mean different things across different like cultures who would be studying this.
Yeah.
So like how does this research then like apply to like different international settings?
Yes, that's a very good question. And Carter at colleagues in 2013, I believe, they did do a paper that was kind of like this way of stimulating researchers and saying, hey, we need to be consistent with terms. We need to be sure that the terms we are using have the same meaning for all of us. And I think the title was something like, what are ecologists really measuring when it comes to animal personality? And this paper, it really does a good job in showing, like in really giving like specifics on what is a personality trait, what is a behavior, what is a behavioral syndrome, that is when different traits are correlated to each other. And then it also shows all the analytic process to say, yes, this is personality because it is repeatable over context and times, or no, this is not. And how to use different systems to and create the same question and see if we get to the same answer. So that is a way of doing, just like relate on previous research. And I would say that after 2013, things like have always been kind of like approached in the right way. And then all the other studies by Real and colleagues, they are very, very consistent, and they are the main group that has worked on this topic, and so they are reliable to go and like look at like what is what.
I'm curious about the, I guess, timeline and understanding the difference between personality and behavior, whether or not like personality can change over time, or if that would then be considered behavior that changes. And then if you see in maybe animal communities that are more social, if there are other animals that teach, or if animals change based on like the human interaction that you have, if you see that an animal that's more bold becomes more shy because of an experience.
Yeah, so regarding the first part of your question, here is an example. This is the ethogram that we used when we were seeing the videos of how the squirrels would act in the arena test. And so like, see on the left, you have behaviors. So like just moving, locomotion, the raising on the back legs, or scanning with the head. Those were all behaviors that give us an indication of the personality trait, that is activity, or exploration, scratching the floor, or sniffing, or putting the head in those 4 holes so that you saw on the floor. So those are behaviors, and the other ones on the right are personality traits. And how, like, the interesting thing about personality is that there is a component that is heritable. So there is a component that will be passed to offspring, and so that will also have ramifications into like how the population is structured in terms of personality profiles. And then there is a part that is fixed, like there is a part that is like your personality, but there are parts of it that might change over time. The point is like that it's unlikely that an individual who is bold is going to get shy. Like if you just think of the extremes of the spectrum, there might be some variability. And this is also why we do not do just one arena test on that individual. We wait some time and then we expose that individual again, because there might be some habituation, and that squirrel might be like, I know this thing, I know it's not going to happen anything to him, so I'm just going to wait. And we did some studies, and so that if you do those tests repeated, like too close to each other, you're not going to have really a good measurement on the personality. So yes, there are changes over time, also based on the experience of the individual. And so just think of personality how a fixed component, a component that might change over time, and then a component, or a component of that will be passed to your offspring. So it's like this articulated system, but I would say that like there might be changes over time, but if I'm here, I'm presenting to you, I was born as a shy person, I'm still shy, but I'm still talking in public. So there are some shifts, but your personality will still be the same.
I think we have time for one last question. If somebody wants to think of one last question, while you do that, I'm going to relay to you, and I don't think this is Dan McCoy prompted a question that is probably not worth justifying him with a response.
Okay, now I want to read it.
Have you used the Myers? So how did they do?
Oh, we will not reply to that. Yes.
How did you account for stress in your study with the arena studies?
Yeah, stress is a part of something that you can measure. And for example, with mice, not so much with squirrels, but with mice, as stress, you can count the number of feces they release in the arena. And actually from feces, then there are other type of like analysis that you can do in your lab where you can extract the cortisol level and see like how much stress the individual was during the acute stress event. Then for squirrels, for example, if you know the species, grooming might be another behavior that could kind of like account for the level of stress. And so stress is something that we do measure directly or indirectly inside the arena.
Well, join me in thanking Mari for her great presentation. Let's get everybody at 12:30 next week for Kurt Davidson.
Thank you, everyone online.
Thank you.